This episode of Talk Your Book is proudly brought to you by Honan, providing a complete range of insurance, risk and financial solutions.
Fundies called me up, told me to take a look, but stay stubborn as bulls and talk their own book. Get the money, get the money, get the money.
Well, Michael McNeilly, thanks very much for coming on Talk Your Book. I thought it'd be a good place to start if you told me a little bit about Metal Tiger PLC and what you guys look to invest in.
Absolutely appreciate it, Chris. Thanks for having me. So Metal Tiger's an AIM quoted investing company. So we're not really strictly a fund per se. So we invest on behalf of the shareholders. So we focus primarily on two types of investments, sort of active and when I say active, that means we take a larger percentage stake and we take a board seat and we get really hands-on and trying to add value in ways that sort of corporate people can add value, as well as bringing some technical expertise to the team. So some examples of that are our investments in Cobre and Southern Gold, which we completed recently, as well as our project investment in Kalahari Metals Limited. And then we also have this more passive approach. Our largest shareholding, which we're going to talk about, I believe, today, is Sandfire Resources, which we obtained as a result of our active approach with Mod Resources, which were acquired last year. And then we really have a portfolio of other sort of smaller size investments to, I guess, up to a couple million Aussie maximum size sort of investments, and primarily focused on precious and base metals, simply because they're very large markets, easy to understand.
And so give us a brief overview of Sandfire, what they do and what their prospects look like from a helicopter view.
Yeah, so Sandfire is well known for the DeGrussa mine. They acquired the Monty mine about 2 to 3 years ago, and have been adding that into their mine plan there. They've only got about 2 years left now. I think they end September FY 2022. According to their reserve model. There may be some additional, stockpiles or other things that they can process there. There might be, and they've talked about recently, the potential to start processing gold and adding sort of a cyanide and leach facility to their plant, which I think would be, it's too early to tell, but that would be quite an interesting way of potentially reducing some of their rehab costs as well. So that's quite a positive. They should generate from that mine probably between 550 and 600 million of free cash flow. And again, it depends really on what they spend their money on. They've got to think about a large chunk of that free cash flow goes towards dividends as well. So they've been paying consistently, annually about 30 to 35 million Aussie in a dividend. So I expect that they'll continue to maintain that dividend throughout that period of time, depending on how other things develop. And then if you look at it, basically right now it's trading at an enterprise value by my calculations of around 320 million Aussie. And the reason I say that, and it's going to be slightly different to other people's, is if you look at what they have in Adriatic, they've got about, even if you discounted it for the fact that they could sell it in a block trade, and I appreciate it's not a cash or cash equivalent, but they've got a just over 15% stake in Adriatic. That's valued, I think, today at around 60 to 65 million Aussie. Now, if they were to do a block trade to somebody on an asset like that, I imagine they could convert that to cash pretty quickly. So I think we should probably use that as mark to market as opposed to fair value. Black Butte, I'm not going to go with the value of their TSX listing, which they own 85% of, because I think that's a little unfair, which I think has got a market cap of 215 million Canadian, but frankly, you could probably say it's worth to Sandfire 60 to 70 million Aussie. But it is TSXV listed, which means there's things that they could do with that. They've managed to get their record of decision. They have actually had some not injunctions, but they've had legal claims brought against the regulator in Montana, which they have to fight together, but there's no injunction. So look, I think with that vehicle, they could do some interesting things. They've obviously put a lot of money into it, and it's almost maybe a blessing in disguise that they don't necessarily need to put the capital up for that, which means they can focus on where I see a lot of the value coming from in the future, which is the T3 project in Botswana. But before we get to the sort of T3 project on Botswana, I'm really impressed by the fact they've also got this really large exploration package in Australia. So they've got a commanding presence. I think they're probably the 10th largest tenement holder in Australia. So all of that is essentially in here for free. They're consistently spending 50 million Aussie a year on exploration, which they're writing off, which is ultra conservative. So you're getting great option value, over the next 2 years with a dividend free cash flow. And then you have to add in obviously this T3 and A4 project. Now T3, just to give a bit of context, they acquired the T3 project by acquiring Mod Resources, as well as essentially acquiring an circa 11,500 square kilometer land package in the Kalahari Copper Belt. I'd say about 8,000 square kilometers of which is really, really prospective in the central structural corridor, as they like to call it. And then finally, just a quick plug here for Metal Tiger. We have a 2% net smelter royalty over that 8,000 square kilometers, excluding the T3 project within Metal Tiger, which we believe might be worth a lot in the future. So A4 is something which I've been following very closely. We look at the satellite imagery on that. We try to count the drill pads. And we've done some back of the envelope calculations on that, and I could see that probably coming in at a maiden resource estimate, which they've said they'll have by the end of the year. They were targeting September. I could see that coming in at 250 to 300,000 tons of contained copper, with a CU equivalent of 1.8 to 2% on that. Now, if you think about, they've probably spent 20 to 25 million Aussie exploring that, and they're going to get close to 2 billion US in metal in the ground that should be open pittable and truckable and higher grade. So if they start integrating that into the T3 project, it's going to seriously change the economics. On top of that, they haven't managed to drill A1 yet. But from my understanding, A1 looks like a very, very similar signature to T3 and A4. And again, that's within trucking distance as well. And there's some early encouraging drill holes from Mod Resources back in the day. And on top of that, they're not even looking at longer term what they could get from going down dip and also at depth. So I think this is going to turn into a very large processing hub, and they could be sitting on 1 million tons of contained copper, which they could prove up potentially in the next 12 months, which in the global context, there's not too many deposits with 1 million tons of contained copper at that grade in what I consider a very stable jurisdiction like Botswana.
And so you're an ex-director of Mod Resources, I believe.
Yeah,
so you're in a pretty unique position to give a bit of insight on this. Talk to me a little bit more about Botswana and what you feel like the regulatory environment is there, and how you've gotten comfortable with that as a mining jurisdiction.
Absolutely. Well, they recently changed their the director of mines, put in place an interim director of mines, and I believe the word on the street is they want somebody who's going to push these types of projects forward. They have, their industry is essentially tourism. Well, there isn't any tourism right now because of COVID. Agriculture, they've got a finance industry, and then obviously mining with diamonds. And so I think they see this as absolutely critical for their industry to progress this. The neighbors up the road are developing, Zone 5, Koimaku, and that's already under construction. And so, you could potentially see down the line a tie-up of Sandfire and that. They could merge to become a very, very large copper producer if it made sense. But I think given they're pushing that, given what I know from Kalahari Metals, we speak to the same farmers to get access as they do. So we know firsthand that Sandfire have already acquired the farm, and I also know that they've acquired it a lot cheaper than what Mod were proposing to acquire it for, and I mean significantly cheaper, which would indicate that the government has stepped in and helped them to acquire that. That has its own problems for us as Kalahari Metals operating there. It means a lot of the farmers are now going, oh, great. Well, if you find something, you're just going to get the government to come in and force us to sell. So it's a double-edged sword for the explorers in the belt. But obviously very positive for Sandfire. So I think they will not struggle, nor will they go through anywhere near the level of permitting issues. They've already received their environmental permits. I think water is going to be one of the major concerns, and in particular with the local, Afrikaans, Botswanan farmers. They're very, very concerned about water, and obviously water is an issue in the sense that if you build large reservoirs, the elephants could come and wreck your camp. So there's going to be some operational risk. It is the first, we have to be honest, it's the first time that Sandfire has tried to develop something in Africa. I believe, though, that they've consistently demonstrated the ability to hire the right people. And in particular, if you just look at the history of Sandfire, he was very successful at getting that up and running, even though he had, I think it was Oz Mineral Shop on the register with 19% at one point in time. So I do believe they'll get the right people in place to deliver a good outcome.
And so it's been an exciting day in the gold mining space on the ASX with Saracen and Northern Star proposing a tie-up with over $300 million of cash on the balance sheet with Sandfire. Do you see them looking to acquire new opportunities, or do you think they've got enough CapEx coming up with their growth prospects that they'll be saving the money for that?
I think it could go both ways. Either they could be a target, or they could be looking to do something. I'm aware that they were previously, I believe, looking at Adventus in Ecuador. That continues to progress. The problem is there's just not that many, copper prospects around of the sort of size and scale for Sandfire. So if, again, I'm not leading their business development team by any stretch of the imagination. So I don't know what they're looking at currently. I just know what they were looking at when the mod deal was going on, because we kept our ears close to the ground. But I think they could go for some from acquisitions. They've certainly alluded to it in their news. But if I were them, I would focus on getting T3, A4 up and running, getting some drill holes into A1, re-rating their share price, because they can't be really using their cash right now in an acquisition, and their scrip is just way too cheap. So I think, for example, when you look at Adriatic, I don't think they're in the position to make a bid for Adriatic right now with scrip, and they certainly don't have the cash to do it. So I can't see that happening. Maybe if their price was closer to 7, they could get on an M&A tear, but not at 420 or whatever it was last time I checked.
And so from a macro perspective, what's your long-term thesis on copper, and I guess to a lesser extent gold and silver with Sandfire? What is it about copper in particular that you like in the next 3 to 5 years?
Well, in the next 3 to 5 years, again, it's very hard to tell how the world's going to be. Before I could have given you a very simple sort of 3-year outlook. It's very difficult to say right now. I think for the next year to 2 years, I'm very positive that there's a huge amount of infrastructure spend going on. A lot of those projects are going to require copper now. And so that's going to provide some support for the copper price. On top of that, we've got supply disruptions, which could continue, although they have been improving. I noticed that TCs have gone up, last month in anticipation of trying to negotiate next year's, TCs. But with that said, longer term, it's very clear where China, who consumes about 50% of the world's copper, sees the importance of copper. Just look at Ivanhoe. Look at who owns most of Ivanhoe mines. That is probably the best deposit on the planet, undeveloped, it's in development. So if they're taking that strategic approach, then I like the odds that copper is going to be very, very, very critical. I do think Europe and certain other countries, maybe the US, will change depending on who gets elected. If Biden's elected, you could see a real push for sort of America getting back into this whole green economy. I do think regardless of who wins, you're going to see a lot of sort of pro-strategic metals and pro-mining again in the US. It's kind of going to have to be a balance between the green side of things and having your sort of strategic metals. But copper, look, at the end of the day, every gas station in the world one day is going to have a charging station into it. That's all going to require copper wiring. And if you adhere to sort of all these cars coming down and reducing greenhouse emissions, there's only one way that the copper price can go. And the supply side, grades are getting lower. Just look at the amount of projects there are. There's just not that many. 3 to 5 years, I'm very bullish on copper. For gold, I think gold's going to be, it just depends really on how much fiscal stimulus you get, whether we have inflationary environment or some sort of deflationary environment. For now, I guess just don't fight the liquidity would be my comment. I think gold's going to do well for the next 18 months. I don't know after that. It's a bit hard to say. And then silver, I think the gold silver ratio is dead, has been for quite some time. But I'm very happy to see silver, back up at these levels. It hit a high, I think, of almost 29. And look, it is an industrial metal, and it has a lot of uses, and I think those uses might continue. So yeah, let's see. Silver is a harder one to sort of predict.
Do you sort of feel silver's a bit of a hybrid between gold and copper?
It is, yeah. I definitely feel that way.
Sometimes the currency, sometimes it's linked to growth-driven inflation. It sort of almost has a mind of its own.
Sometimes there's a physical short squeeze going on in the market, there kind of is right now, and the price reflects accordingly. But again, it's the physical use of a metal, and the paper markets can often, or the value can often be quite disconnected depending on who's doing what behind the scenes in terms of buying stuff.
Just getting back before we wrap up on Sandfire, we've spoken about the Botswana assets. We know DeGrussa has been an incredible asset that's winding down. Talk to me a little bit about Black Butte and the issues that they've had there, and whether you think there's a chance to monetize that, sell it off in some way, or what you think they might or should do with that asset.
Well, if I were them, I would raise third-party financing for Sandfire Resources America. No idea what price it would be at, and use it as a sort of acquisitions vehicle to go off and sort of consolidate, interesting, development or VMS copper projects in North America and South America. They've put in close to 40 million Aussie. I don't have the exact number, but it's close to that. So if you start comparing that to the T3 and A4 acquisition, and they come out with the A4 maiden resource, and you compare the two in terms of timelines, the T3 mod acquisition is going to stand up much better. The reserves went down at Black Butte, and I think there might be exploration upside, but again, 2 years, going back and forth in litigation, environmental things, I think it'll get there. I just think it might be better off, Sandfire bringing in third parties to do it so that they can really focus on, exploration close to DeGrussa, closer to home, as well as Botswana, and also saving some firepower for maybe some M&A.
Beautiful. All right. Well, thanks for coming on. It's very hard to get good copper exposure. So many of the majors are influenced by the commodity. So to get some good copper exposure and a bit of gold, it feels like an interesting story. Thanks again.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate it.
This episode of Talk Your Book was proudly brought to you by Honan, who go beyond a transactional insurance broker to deliver better outcomes for their clients. If you're enjoying Talk Your Book, make sure you subscribe to Chris Judd Invest.